Good evening.
Wow, that was something.
That's Mimi.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for coming. Say hello to all our viewers. Thank you for coming. It is my Mimi and my deep pleasure and honor to have with us Dr. Robin Mitchell. She is a friend. She is someone that I've known. I asked yesterday because I thought, it was like longer, but we've known each other since '98. She is a fabulous educator, historian, researcher, groundbreaker, author, trailblazer.
Oh my.
And I say all that and she's gonna be like, oh shit, I'm done. I'll see you next week. But Robin is, I call Robin the tip of the spear because the seminal work that she's doing around women and gender and putting Black women in particular in their rightful place, their proper place, she is doing some fabulous work with that. So Robin, without further ado, can you tell us a little about yourself?
I can. Thank you. It's good to see you. Yes, it feels like we've been friends for 100 years. So I wrote a book called VÉNUS NOIRE, which was about Black women and colonial fantasies in 19th century France. And what the book does is it looks at the appropriation and the production of Black women's bodies and their voices. And it attempts to show how these bodies helped white French men and women talk about what would be represented as a white male defeat in what would become known as Haiti. So there's a lot of moving parts here. And I use appropriation and production very specifically. And I'll explain that in a second. But let me start with this idea of Haiti being visualized as a male defeat. Women clearly fought in the Haitian Revolution. What I'm talking about, however, is how scholars have a tendency to talk about revolution, talk about military, talk about the war as male space. And so what I wanted to look at was this idea that France would see what happened in Haiti as a white male defeat. And I wanted to see how that defeat helped fuel certain types of colonial fantasies. Fantasies about a colony lost, and that it helped both white French men and women imagine a new identity after the revolution's end. Okay, so the book is doing a lot of things. It's looking at these Black women, but it's also looking at the people looking at them. I wanted to turn the gaze back upon itself, right? And so in order to do that, in order to look at appropriation and production, in order to say, look, this is how they are producing these bodies, I needed to show what white contemporaries knew or thought they knew about these Black women, because in actuality, they knew quite a bit about them. But what I wanted to do was to highlight the lengths that they would go to manipulate their bodies and their voices, right? So I chose 3 particularly visible Black women who loomed rather large on the French landscape in the beginning to mid-19th century. So I start with Sarah Baartman, who was also known as the Hottentot Venus, Orica, a young Senegalese girl purchased and gifted as a house pet to a French noble family, and Jeanne Duval, the common law wife of the white French poet Charles Baudelaire. And what I found at the end of my research is no matter how close these women get to some kind of imaginary Frenchness, they're never French. Yeah. That the bar is just constantly moving, right? And that even though white French men and women are going through sort of cataclysmic change during that period, there is a monarchy, there's a republic, there's an empire, there's a monarchy, an empire, a monarchy, and an empire, right? And with each one of those, people have to figure out who they are again. And so even though these white French men and women were constantly sort of changing what it meant to be French, Black bodies didn't have the same luxury.
But were these outside of Sarah Batman, were the other two women seeking to become French?
I don't know if one sort of seeks to be French or one is simply French. Jean Duval was born in France, so doesn't matter what she's thinking.
Mm-hmm.
She's French, right?
Yeah.
And in the case of Ulrika, who comes over when she's about 2 or 3, she's raised in a noble family. She's raised as an aristocrat. She knows nothing else, right? And so it's only when white folks need to figure out what to do with these Black women that they understand it is something that cannot be attained. Right. If you look at the idea of double consciousness, the whole idea where it's like one day you discover who you are, it's the same thing, I think, in France, that these moments happen where they realize Frenchness is not going to happen for them.
Yeah. It's interesting because in my reading in preparation for this interview, I was it was interesting to read reviews about your book, with them talking about the intersectionality.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering how much of what you put in your book was intentional, or if it just kind of worked out that way because of the different forces and elements that were colliding against each other.
I am one of those people who very happily and proudly will talk about critical race theory and my place in it. My work doesn't function without being really steeped in notions of race and gender, without reading folks, mostly Black women scholars, who have talked about intersectionality, have talked about these sort of multiple oppressions, but have also teased out Black womanhood from just this idea of Blackness. Right. So the idea is that Black women in France, in particular, have a very particular trajectory. And unless you're willing to sort of look at how race functions, and I'm all for this idea that race is a social construct, but it doesn't mean it can't fuck up your day. Right. So this idea is, I wanted to be really specific and see how race was gendered. And so that's why I looked at the women.
Yeah. How easy or how difficult was it for you going to the archives, going to the libraries and all those places to gather the information that you sought to pull your book together?
It was very difficult for lots of reasons. One, France doesn't acknowledge the existence of race. And so you have to figure out how to find the people that you want to find, right? So I remember going to Musée Carnavalet, which is the museum for the city of Paris, which I think just reopened. And I said, look, I'm doing a project. I was working on my dissertation at the time. And I said, I'm doing a project on Black women. And they had some guy come out and talk to me. And he said, well, we don't really have that. And behind him was a sign that said Black on it. It was like nègre. And I said, well, you have that. And he sort of turned around and looked at it and he said, yeah, we have that, but that's about it. And on the other side of him was this clock. It was a big fat man with a clock face in his belly, and he was sort of holding onto his belly, and he was Black. And I said, well, you have that.
Yeah.
And he said, that's it. And I thought, okay, you're on your own here. And so I remember feeling really defeated and walking around the museum, and I came across a painting, the Galerie du Palais Royal, which has a number of white women prostitutes and these white Frenchmen that are bargaining for them. And I was looking at the painting, and I looked over into the bottom corner of the painting, and there was a Black woman in it. And I thought, okay, just you're on your own here.
Yeah, yeah.
Either people don't see it or they don't think it's important. And since I think it's important, I just have to figure this out.
Search for it.
And once you sort of say, I'm going to see where I find Black women, you find them everywhere. It's completely disproportionate to the number of Black women that are living in France, but they still matter.
Yeah.
And someone needs you to understand something about a Black woman being in a painting. So once I sort of figured that out, then it became finding the kind of language that I needed to do the work and to find where Blackness sort of resided. And I realized late that slavery happens on the water, and so most of the things about Blackness are with the Minister of the Marine, right? So once I started figuring out where would Black people sort of show up, I mean, I remember going to the police archives in Paris because I thought, these people see Black people as a problem.
Yeah.
Well, where do you go when there's a problem? So once I started finding lots of examples. I got very lucky, but it took me a while to negotiate the archives. Archives are really intimidating spaces. I'm almost always the only Black person in there.
Yeah, probably intentionally intimidating.
I have no doubt.
Yeah.
And so going in there, you think, and then, you have to walk up and explain to them what you're doing. And, based on the day, you'll either get something or not get something. And so I wasted a lot of time. I think if I went and did this project now, it would look different because I'm better at it now.
Yeah. So how long were you in France?
A total of about 3 years. When I went the first time, I was supposed to only stay about 9 months, and it's Paris, so I ended up staying something like 2 years.
Okay. And were you fluent in French when you went, or was it something that you learned as you?
I speak French like a second grader. I'm taking lessons now, only because what I realized is I speak some weird 19th century dialect because that's what I read.
Yeah.
And so I'll read a phrase and I'll think, that's a great phrase. I'll have to use it. And then I'll use it in conversation. People look at me like I'm insane because they don't use that kind of language anymore. So it got better. And then I moved away and it got terrible. And I'm taking lessons again. I read better than I speak.
Okay. So you said something about, the French don't see race, or they don't acknowledge races. Yeah. So how does that manifest? Is it just that they just act as if Black people are just incidental to being in the place?
They say, they talk about, French national identity. They talk about Frenchness. One is French or one is not French. And that is based on all kinds of things, the language, the culture. But, talking about Frenchness in that way hides a lot of stuff, right? So, like France doesn't, keep track of racial distinctions. Yet, for the most part, when you turn in a resume, your picture has to be on it. Like they're going to find out information that they want to know, right? They look at where you live. They look at all kinds of other things, but they hide behind this notion that race isn't important. They also have criticized American historians quite a bit who do this work, and accusing us of imposing racial standards that are American based on French culture. Yeah. And, my response is always, I was trained pretty well at Berkeley, right? I know the difference between race in America and race in France. Race changes over time, no matter where you are. I know that Marie Antoinette was considered racially different during her period in the 18th century because she was from Austria. I also know in 1777, color becomes synonymous with slavery, and they start talking about it differently.
Yeah.
Right. So France, I think, hides behind this idea that folks just are French, and it's nonsense. It's nonsense.
Can you talk a little more about how Haiti kicking Napoleon's ass really affected French manhood?
Yeah, I'm not a Haitian historian. I'm not trained to be that, but what became very clear to me is the trauma of the loss of Haiti. You know, Napoleon says almost immediately after he loses what is known as Saint-Domingue at the time, he says, well, I didn't really want it anyway. And I think, you know, 30,000 men died for something that you didn't really want anyway, right?
And he's lying, because didn't he try to reinvade?
Oh God, he's completely lying. France in like I found something in 1871, like my work stops in 1850, but I found something in 1871 and it was like, we can get Haiti back. And I thought, no, but you can't though. So I don't think France ever stops thinking about it. They have the mother of all temper tantrums with the imposition of fines and debt. So I think Napoleon is devastated by that loss. I think France is devastated by that loss. Napoleon, for a long time, keeps newspapers from reporting on what's happening during the revolution. So a lot of people in France think they're winning. So their feelings get hurt
when they find out that they lost.
Absolutely. And then you get these people fleeing from Saint-Domingue coming to France, and they basically tell Napoleon, either get us our stuff back or pay us for what we lost. And once they realize that's probably not going to happen, their own language talking about what happened in Haiti starts becoming more and more racist. Napoleon reinstates slavery in all of France's colonies almost immediately. I mean,
the backlash.
He's not okay. Yeah. He's not okay at all.
Yeah.
And so, you know, he can talk about whatever he wants to. You know, I'm doing some work on a new project right now that has Napoleon's secret police talking to him about a Black woman who is on French soil that he's having followed. And he's having her followed because she's the wife of Toussaint Louverture. So there are all kinds of indications from Napoleon having the Louverture family kidnapped and brought to France to
family.
Yeah, he kidnaps Toussaint, his wife, the sons. So there's 3 of the sons, a cousin, and I believe 2 servants.
So let me ask you a question, because in my reading, they kept on saying that he invited Toussaint to come to France to negotiate. So that's what he did?
He lied.
And then snatched them.
Yeah, and then kidnapped him, separated Toussaint and her, their oldest son, sent them to prison, and then moved the rest of this sort of entourage throughout France. They were in Bordeaux. They might have been in Paris, and they end up in a town called Agen. Wow. And she lives the rest of her life there. And
so she couldn't go home. She wasn't allowed to go back home.
No, and there are a lot of articles and things that start coming out about, you know, this family and what they're doing. But under Napoleon's watch, the French police put the entire family under heavy surveillance, which means they're being followed everywhere.
Can you share your reasoning why you picked these 3 particular women?
Or why these women picked me? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
When I went to graduate school, I thought I was going to study Josephine Baker.
Yeah, you told me that.
Yeah. I think I told you that right after I graduated from college or something. I was like, it's all about Josephine. Poor Josephine. And so I thought I was going to study why Josephine Baker still is considered to be sort of a marker of Black womanhood. I thought that was what I was going to do. So I was reading a lot of books on Josephine Baker, came across a biography written by her son. And he is talking about right before Josephine Baker is going to become an international star. right? She's doing her last rehearsal of the so-called banana dance, where the next night she'll be topless in a skirt made out of bananas and the world will erupt, right?
Yeah.
And so I was interested in this idea that she's got a white French choreographer and he's choreographing her, who is a Black American from St. Louis, to represent Africa, right? Like, okay. And so he has this producer come in to watch the rehearsal, and after it's over, you know, they sort of turn to the producer and say, "What do you think?" And he says something which changed the trajectory of my work. Is he said, "We need tits." He said, "These French people with their fantasies of Black women, we got to show them the tits." And I thought, what fantasies? Is there someone else before there? And it was all bets were off. I started moving backward, thinking I was going to move back like a couple of years, and ended up in 1810 and found Sarah Bartman. And once I found Sarah Bartman, all bets were off.
So the thing is that it's just this titillation that they have with seeing a naked Black woman.
I think, sure, I think it's absolutely titillation, but I think, and what I tried to argue in the book is that it's a lot more, that Black women function in a lot of ways as a training or a teaching tool, right? This idea that they're useful in teaching lots of people how not to be. So that you can use Black women to talk to and threaten white women. Right? If you don't behave, this is what happens, right? You can use Black women's bodies to talk about Black men. And you can also use Black women to talk about white men. So that Black women do a lot of work. It's not just sexual, even though sex is there. I mean, there are multiple examples of Black women as being hypersexual. There's also being hypermasculine. It changes. Right. And that's what was interesting to me about these women's bodies, is that the French used them to have lots of other conversations.
And is it the French literati, the French political elite, who are the cultural, who are the ones that are driving this?
What I found was it's high culture and it's low culture. It is scientists and it's politicians. You know, it's lay people. It's like white French people on just about every class or political rung. So like this idea is you've got concierge. Like I found a letter that like Napoleon would use concierge, people who work in buildings to survey. Right. So I came across this letter that this concierge had written to her mayor, and she said, "There's a bad man living in my building. And how do I know he's bad? He's got 2 women in there." And she says, "And one of them is Black. So you need to get over here." Right. And so that is just a common everyday woman who sees Blackness and uses that as to prove a problem. Right. And so you've got everyone from a concierge to the French Surgeon General, who is almost gleeful when Sarah Bartman dies. He gets permission from the government to dissect her body, and his autopsy is absolutely fascinating, right? So, and then you get vaudeville, right, where these women are useful in training the working class on how to be French, and for them that means you can't desire Blackness in any kind of way, right? So they're everywhere. They're in painting. I mean, and what I wanted to understand was, how can they be everywhere and there not be a conversation about what they're doing? Because they're doing work. I wanted to know what kind of work, but it doesn't matter your class status. If you were poor, you could see the Hottentot Venus, you know, with a bunch of other people. And if you were rich, you might get a private showing. But everybody got to see her if they wanted to. right? So it's not like only the elites know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows what's going on.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, as much of the world, well, I don't know if it's the world, but as much as the United States is dealing with the so-called reckoning,
Mm-hmm.
are you seeing anything similar to that in France at this particular moment?
I think so. They had an Afro-Frenchman who was killed by the police around the same time as George Floyd, and they took to the streets in a way that I have not really ever seen before. Right. So, I mean, France takes to the streets. Don't get me wrong. They'll put up a barricade in 5 minutes, but that was the first time I had seen something like that. Them come out to have to protest violence against Black people. They've been, folks have been dealing with Islamophobia in France for a very long time. They've been dealing with, negrophobia for a very long time. There are a lot of people doing the work, but it seems to be becoming more public for me in ways that I hadn't seen before.
Is that how much of that? And I don't know if you have the answer, but what I'm seeing here is that much of what we've seen in terms of protest demonstrations and people on the streets is young people.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the same thing there?
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of things coming together. You've got, they're gaining critical mass in terms of talking about racisms, in ways that I don't think a lot of them have been allowed to speak about. Right. Mm-hmm. And so now they're just speaking about it wherever they want to speak about it. Right.
White people generally.
I think the young folks that you're talking about are out there just talking, right? And at the same time, I think there are a number of scholars, not just American scholars. There are French scholars that are talking about race and talking about anti-Blackness and talking about Islamophobia in ways that were not as prevalent when I was just starting my studies.
And I guess as that continues to manifest, it's fueling the rise of someone like Marine Le Pen.
Exactly. Her father said something that I actually wrote down because it sort of proved everything I always thought. He said, I think this is a direct quote. He said, "One must be born French or deserve it."
Oh,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, and how does one deserve Frenchness?
But
right?
they're acting, for instance, is this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow?
Of course they are. But, I have to say this because it's important. They're not special here. America does the same thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like focus on France because that's where I study. But America does that too.
Yeah.
This idea that one must deserve to be here. And that, I mean, what? What? This idea for me, it's sort of fascinating. But this notion that because as soon as you say something like one must deserve Frenchness, then you get to determine how they deserve it.
But a piece of shit like him shouldn't even be talking about deserving Frenchness.
Exactly.
Because he's a vile creature.
And so is his daughter.
His daughter ain't no different.
But, at the same time, you've got... It's interesting to me in the last couple of years. The Modèle Noir, which was an exhibit on Black artists and paintings, opened in New York. Young Denise Morel was doing her dissertation on it, and then the exhibit moved to France. And so I went to the exhibit. It sold out. It was one of the most popular exhibits that France has ever done.
Oh.
And it was on Blackness, right?
Yeah.
And so I went and it was packed. It was packed.
Yeah.
And I was shocked, having been to the museum a number of times, there were Black people all over that place. And I was shocked at how many Black Americans were there. And they were like, we heard and we missed it in New York. And and I thought, here it is.
Yeah.
And it's funny because we talk about sort of consumerism, Black consumerism, and making money off the backs of Black people. And then I went to the bookstore and bought everything they had. And I thought, okay, I'm hopeless. But I wanted images of Black women.
Yeah.
And so I was buying books, I was buying postcards, I have a refrigerator magnet, and I thought, okay, I am part of the problem. Exactly. So like being in there was amazing.
Yeah.
I have all of those as postcards. It's shameful. I'm ashamed. The images are amazing. They're breathtaking, and to push back against this notion, Sarah Bartman, push back against this notion that sort of Blackness doesn't exist. It's absurd.
Mm-hmm.
It's absurd. And that, I think, exhibits like that are going to make it much harder for people to say that Blackness isn't important.
Yeah, yeah. The famous book, VÉNUS NOIRE.
With the most beautiful cover I have ever seen in my life. I have to talk about this cover really quickly because University of Georgia Press.
Take your time.
University of Georgia. I had picked another image for the book. I was positive it was a better image. And they said, well, we have an idea for the book cover. And I said, no, this is the cover. And then they came out with this cover, which should tell you that you should let people who know what they're doing do their job.
Who is this person? Do we know who this woman is?
Yes. She was listed as African. She was listed as African Noir. And there were two sculptures, this one and a man. I think his name was Abdullah. He has a name. She doesn't have one listed. The sculpture is striking for so many reasons. One, look at her hair.
Yeah.
You can see her natural hair. Another, her breasts are not exposed. And so I think Carpeau did this image, and they were talking about how he was trying to show dignity to Black bodies. And, my response to that was, then why didn't he use her name? Yeah. Right. He knows the guy's name, and he says he knew her name and didn't claim it. So there are a number of times where you see these absolutely beautiful images, and
no name.
Scholars are talking about how they show dignity. And for me, I'm almost always pushing back against that because they're nameless.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But University of Georgia Press did that cover. I think it just won an award for the cover. It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. It is.
It's beautiful.
So we have some questions and comments. Okay. My brother Alton, what was the discussion about race in France and the rest of Europe prior to the slave trade, and how do you juxtapose that to the discussion today?
Ooh, okay. Well, race clearly looks different. Okay, that France is talking about other white people as being racially different before the advent of slavery. Okay, so they're talking about themselves. They're trying to figure out who they are and who the rest of sort of Europe is, and they are marking other parts of Europe as being other. Okay, that's going to consolidate in some really particular ways once the slave trade begins.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So in the 18th century, they begin a discussion about what to do about Black people in France. There's something that Sue Peabody calls the freedom principle. She writes about it in her books, where the idea that France and England were supposed to be so exalted that slavery couldn't exist on its shores.
Wow.
Right. So technically, once Sally Hemings actually hits French soil, she should have been free. Same with her brother.
Yeah.
So in the 18th century, there's a number of laws that France designed to try to figure out what to do with Black people that they have on French soil and how to get them off of French soil. Okay. And so they're
do all the work.
Sorry?
Who would do all the work?
Well,
I keep on thinking that what we need to think about is the fact that these motherfuckers went all the way to Africa to find someone to do their labor because
They did.
they're too goddamn lazy to do it themselves.
They did. Yes. And then all of a sudden, though, you have this freedom principle where you're like, oh, they're free. And it's like, oh, shit. No, they can't be free. So, right, in 1716, an edict comes out that says, if you are white and you bring an enslaved servant with you and you don't register them and they're not there to learn a trade, they're free, which is stupid. Because now you've got free Black people walking, right?
Yeah,
and they figure that out. That was in 1712. In 1716, they go, oh, no, wait, no.
Made a mistake.
All of that applies, but they become property of the crown. And so all of a sudden we have the monarchy benefiting from exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so like 1712, 1716, 1732, 1777, there are all of these discussions about sort of what we do with these bodies. And like in 1783, there is a legislative committee that is brought together solely to figure out what to do with Black people that are on French soil. And they say, free them all and get them all off French soil. And then we have the revolution, so it never happens, right? So one of the things that the book is trying to show is that race has always been a conversation in France, right?
So did the revolution, did they deal at all with the Black French?
Well, it's really interesting because I was talking to somebody about, France and Britain are always snipping at each other. And so Britain is always like, oh, well, we had abolitionists. Well, so did France, but they were all killed in the terror, right? So France is almost starting over again at the end of revolution in terms of people that are talking about, if they're talking about anti-slavery. And those that are talking about anti-slavery are often accused of being treasonous, taking things that are going on in England, right? So there are all kinds of things that are happening. There are all kinds of people talking, but discussions of race in France look to me fascinating, but they're constantly changing, right? And then once you get, once France becomes, a colonizer, it's going to change again.
Yeah.
So I think in many ways, how they do talk and don't talk about race looks very similar to how they don't talk about race now.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm sure that's not very popular stance.
No, yeah. I was just thinking about all of the turmoil that has just swirled around Black French, the Algerians, the Dahomians, all of the Africans who have one way or another ended up in France. And do you get a sense that they've even dealt with that?
Here's the thing, at certain periods of time, France has said to its Black colonies, you are French.
Yeah.
Right? So they don't end up in French. According to France, they're in France, right? And so it's only when it's like, oh, there's too many of them. You're not French anymore. So France has always had, I think, a complicated relationship with any of their so-called others coming over, whether it would be from the Caribbean or when they turn their eye to the sort of scramble for Africa, right?
Yeah.
That folks are welcome and then they're not welcome again. But you've got Afro-French people that are like, I'm French.
Oh yeah.
You told me I'm French.
I've met some.
I have to get some French stuff. I have a French passport. You don't get to tell me I'm not French, right? And so it's complicated.
Yeah.
And you cannot be a former colony. And, former colony, I say that with the fact that they still have departments and territories.
Yeah.
And don't think you have to deal with what you brought about.
Yeah. It's real interesting because I keep on reading about French escapades in Africa. they refused to release the Francophone countries. And I've been reading that. I read a document, has to have been like about maybe 10 years ago, that I've never been able to find any good sourcing on, that said that one of the stipulations of the French government is that like 60 or 80% of the treasuries of these countries the money has to be in French banks in France.
I wouldn't be surprised by that at all.
You know, and I'm just wondering, when are they going to shake these goddamn lice off of their bodies?
I don't know. You know, I want to be really careful here, because I don't ever want to be in a position to tell Afro-French people that they're not French. If they think they're French, they're French. That's not my business. But France still has its grubby little hands in a lot of different pies, right? And they continually sort of change what Frenchness looks like, what immigration looks like, you know, who can come, who can't. I saw an earlier question, somebody brought up negritude.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Harlem Renaissance writers, you know, flood into France between the two world wars, and the French can't get enough of them. But negritude writers, completely different.
Really?
Yes. You know why? Because negritude writers are French.
Yeah.
You got to do something with Senghor and Césaire that you don't have to do with Langston Hughes. Right? And so, you know, I think I did my undergraduate thesis on the difference between the Harlem Renaissance and negritude in Paris. And the difference was negritude writers are French and are demanding their Frenchness in many ways. And also saying it cannot be divorced from their Blackness, right? And France is like, oh, no.
That's so interesting, because one of my favorite poets is Leopold Sédar Senghor. So,
yeah, and you know what? He had a very complicated relationship.
Yeah.
He did. And, you know, like Césaire talking about, you know, his youth and when he gets older is very different.
Yeah.
The way he talks about white French people and sort of the white French state.
Yeah.
So it's very, very complicated. And I think that France's unwillingness to unpack some of that makes these kinds of stories really difficult to uncover.
Yeah. So Pata, another brother, good friend, it says these three French intelligence services, the external documentation and the anti-espionage service, the SDECE, DGSC, and the DST have been very active in doing the dirty work that encompasses coups and assassinations. French crimes in Africa have been made up of misinformation campaigns, controlling black governors, that is public presidents, and military propaganda. And Pata also says that France has assassinated 22 African presidents.
Wow.
Since 1963.
Wow. I'm going to be really careful here, not because I doubt that information, but that I'm a 19th centuryist. That's what I do. You know, my work stops in 1871. Like I almost don't even want to go into the 20th century. But if you look at how territories and departments are created, partially they're created from, you know, a native middle class servant. What do they call them? Language has left me. Sort of this middle class governmental structure where folks are often doing the bidding of
the French.
The French, yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I want to kind of switch up a little bit.
Okay.
To kind of link what we were talking about yesterday. You were saying that the field of researchers, educators, academics, Black women is growing.
Yes, it is.
If you could talk a little about that.
I think it's always been strong in America. It's becoming strong in Europe. And that is really exciting for me. Tiffany Florville has just written a book on Afro-German women. Annette Joseph Gabriel has written a book on Black women in the 20th century, and talks about them politically as well. There's a young woman who's doing some work on Afro-Russia. Like we're moving out, you know, and we're sort of moving about. And for me, that's really exciting because Europe had always been presented to me in school as a white space. And what we're seeing is Black folks were all over the place, right? And so it's exciting for me that that scholars are pushing out and looking in these other spaces. You know, there are a number of books on the Black British. I think the Brits do it better than just about anybody right now in terms of books that are coming out about Black British folks. But, you know, we are starting to sort of spread out, and we know about each other, and we're communicating with each other. And that's so exciting for me. It's so exciting for me.
Are there a lot of men doing this?
I don't know. I don't care about men. Yes, there are some. Let me, you know, Tyler Stovall, who was my advisor, is still writing about Blackness in France. He just has a new book out called White Freedom. And so they're sort of out there, but there seem to be a core group of women. Laurel Semley has just published. And so we have all sort of banded together.
Okay. Is that different? The coalescing and the banding together?
It's different than when I was literally when I was a graduate student at Berkeley, there were 300 graduate students. 17 of them were African American. 3 of them were women, and 2 of those women were on leave. And I was the only Europeanist. Right. So, yes, it's different, and it's marvelous to be able to talk to people who envision Europe within the realm of Blackness. I mean, there is a growing field called Black Europe, which it would have been something I would have only dreamed about as a graduate student. Now we're getting together and having conversations about what does Black Europe look like. And that's amazing.
Has there been a lot of pushback from traditionalists?
Yeah.
But that doesn't really matter. Does it really matter?
No.
Because they really can't do much, can they?
No, they really can't. You know, Macron came out and said that, you know, the American systems, American university systems, I think he said, and, you know, our refusal not to look at race and gender is like totally screwing up the French Academy. Like he's blaming all of those dramas. And I thought, wow, we have a lot of power. We don't have that kind of power. But he's blaming sort of this American preoccupation with like race and gender as corrupting. You know, he wasn't kidding. That we are in some ways a corrupting force.
But that is real interesting, because that's pretty much the stance in this country.
Again, France isn't special.
It corrupts America and.
You know, I mean, if I hear one more white person talking about critical race theory without having a clue what it means, you know, I'm gonna lose my mind. It's just like that damn critical race theory. And I thought you couldn't pick critical race theory out of a bucket.
But the thing is that critical race theory is not taught in high schools, and they're putting all their attention in high schools. It's like, what the hell?
I think they're trying to stop conversations from trickling down, as it were. You know, you've got books like Ibram Kendi, who wrote Stamped from the Beginning, who just wrote the equivalent for children. You know, Erica Dunbar, who wrote on Iona Judd, who was enslaved by George and Martha Washington. She's written a children's book.
That Washington's wife chased down until she died.
She's written a book for children. Like I think that's what they're afraid of.
Yeah. My brother, Ray Barry, he's asking, what is the French policy on reparations paid by Haiti? They paying it back.
What is the French policy?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I might turn that question around and talk about sort of what is Haiti trying to do to have reparations returned to them.
Yeah. $21
right?
million in 2021 dollars, by the way.
Yeah. They need that back.
Yeah, they took them 148 years, I think they said, to pay it off.
It was well into the 20th century. I want to say the 1920s. So yeah, they need that back. They need that back. I don't know if we're ever going to get to a point where we can talk about reparations without sending people into fits of madness. I'm reminded of the conversations around Tulsa, the Tulsa massacre, because of the anniversary. And, folks were talking about, well, we don't know who these people were and what they were doing. Of course we do.
Yeah, we do.
We have records. Of course we do.
Yeah.
Plus we have people who, like, the thing that's fascinating to me about looking at Blackness and anti-Blackness in France is that you've got lots of people talking about it because they don't care who sort of knows what they're talking about. So we can say Joe right there got really bitchy that he didn't get this much money because these are how many people he owned in Saint-Domingue. Like, don't tell me we don't know who these people are. We know, of course we know who they are. Like, literally slavery and Blackness is built into the architecture of France, right? So don't tell me we don't know where that money needs to go back. In today's dollars, it needs to go back.
But that's the same issue because I interviewed a guy. He's a reparations expert. His name is Dr. Thomas Kramer, University of Cincinnati.
Okay.
And when he did the calculation of 400 years of free labor,
thank you,
America shit itself, because he said between 14 to 16 trillion dollars is owed to the descendants.
I'm not surprised.
Enslaved Africans.
When you talk about generational wealth, that Tulsa, that Saint-Domingue, that any of these colonies had literally stripped away from them and sent to earn wealth for metropoles all over. I think to myself, that's not going to go away. There's a day of reckoning coming. I'm sure of it.
That's why they can't sleep. That's why they can't sleep.
I know.
Because
I don't be able to sleep either.
I listened to somebody who said that they are lucky that we want justice and not revenge. That's why they can't sleep, because they keep on thinking that what they've done to us, we're going to do to them. It is kind of justice in a way. some karmic justice.
Yeah, I don't mind people being super paranoid. It's really interesting that when I first started doing my work, people were telling me, look, there's not that many Black people on French soil during your time period. And they're correct. There's not that many. So you really can't, Pierre Boulle says there are approximately 7,000, a little over 7,500 Black people in France on the eve of the French Revolution. Right. Out of 25 million. Like, it's very low. Right.
Yeah.
And so I was told, look, these people aren't there, and you can't, how do you do a project of people not there? And this is what I realized. Doesn't matter how many are there. What matters is the rhetoric attached to those that are there and how much trauma and drama it's causing white Frenchmen and women. Right? Yeah. That this idea is, I don't need there to be one real Black body, because they show up in all these places, they show up in all these conversations. And I say in the book very clearly that the reason I know that Black people, and particularly Black women's bodies, matter so much in 19th century France is because there are a whole lot of white Frenchmen and women going to extremes to show that they don't. That's how I know they matter. Right? You don't spend that kind of energy going, they don't matter. If they don't matter. Right? And so it's not even a numerical figure. It is, if these women show up in particular ways in 100 paintings,
Yeah.
then we get to talk about that.
Yeah.
Right? If
Yeah.
you're using a Black body to have a conversation, like there's a white man, Colnay, in my book, who uses the facade of Sarah Bartman to talk about Napoleon. Why? Because it's safer to talk through her and pretend she's talking.
Ah, yeah.
Right? So again, is she really talking? No.
Yeah.
But he needs you to think that's who's talking.
Mm-hmm.
Which means as soon as they come up in any kind of way for me, they're mine.
Yeah.
I can have a conversation about them. If they show up in vaudeville, why?
Yeah.
Why are they showing up in vaudeville, right?
Mm-hmm.
They show up in sculpture, why? If they show up as, like Orica, at one point when Orica is in France in the 18th century, they named a ham and a biscuit after her. Like,
Okay.
why? Why would you name consumables after this little Black girl?
Maybe they
right?
want to.
There it is. Which means I get to have that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So I think what I tried to do is say, look, if we get bogged down in numbers, we're not going to get at what's happening. That this isn't about numbers. It's about strategies that white French men and women are using to cope. Right? And how they're coping is Napoleon is the most powerful man on earth on the eve of the Haitian Revolution, and he's not after.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you make sense of who you are and how you present yourself to the world once you just got your ass kicked?
It's interesting that they have to use Black people,
isn't it though?
To show how powerful
white they are.
How it's like, wow.
Because they know how powerful we are.
Yeah, they do.
They know that it will get some kind of I've lost my words again. It's going to get some kind of comment. It's going to get some kind of feedback. Somebody's going to have something to say. But what I have in the book are a number of white people, both men and women, hiding behind, I call it racial ventriloquism, hiding behind these Black women, pretending that they're speaking. And it's like, oh, okay. I thought you had some power.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
She doesn't have any power.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if you're using a Black person here, what you can say is this Black person is the antithesis of Frenchness, right?
Yeah.
And so they're only saying bad things about France because they don't know any better.
Mm-hmm.
But you're the one feeding them the language.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you get to say, oh, it's not my, she said it. Like, it's not about me. And when that happens over and over and over again, you start thinking there's something going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't feel like people had talked about it in a very particular way. And I didn't think they had centered Black women in the conversation. And so that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah. My brother, Sean Morton, he's asking, he says it often seemed that folks were welcome when work was needed.
Always.
But when they downturns or underemployment, anti-Black sentiment stoked were higher. Is that aligned with what you found in your work?
Not really. And the reason for that is I'm mostly centered in France, and Napoleon will reinstate slavery in 1804, and then it will not be definitively ended until 1848. So the entire period of my book, slavery is the law of the land.
Yeah.
Right. And so the use of Black bodies is different because economic downturns for a lot of white Frenchmen and women, they still have their slaves as property.
To their work.
Exactly.
And for the value that those bodies offer. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, part of Napoleon, part of the acknowledgement of Haiti was reparations. right? Before that, Napoleon was trying to tell everybody, don't acknowledge Haiti, because do you want this there? Right. I know that even in like Louisiana, that for a while they wouldn't allow black soldiers, black sailors to get off boats.
Yeah.
Because they came with news. And the news is guess what Saint Domingue is called now?
Yeah.
It's called Haiti.
Yeah.
And it stoked incredible amounts of paranoia, right?
Yeah.
So
and Haiti is still paying for that today.
They still are. They still are.
So let me ask you. I asked you yesterday. Can you share your thoughts with our listeners about what's going on with Nicole Hannah-Jones at the University of North Carolina? And any connections to you as an academic and others like you?
You know, I think as a Black female academic, it would be stupid not to know what's going on with her. I've met her. I don't know her, but I've met her. She's very kind to me. I believe that her university, which I'm not going to name, is supposed to make a decision tomorrow.
No, the lawsuit said that that they're demanding a decision by tomorrow, but they said that it's not enough time.
Yeah, we'll see what happens tomorrow. But I think what it shows, and I think for a lot of my colleagues have been talking about, 2% of Black women are full professors. I'm not a full professor. I'm an associate. I have tenure. Most full professors have 2 books. I'm working on my second one now. So our number is very, very low. But I think this is a terrible reminder of the precariousness of Black women academics, right? We're almost always one of 2, one of 3 in these universities. And that if you've got someone who is a MacArthur genius and a Pulitzer Prize winner, and you're having this conversation about whether she deserves tenure, somebody like me, I'm nobody. I don't have a Pulitzer, So I think it's a good reminder as if we needed it, but I think it's a good reminder of how precarious we are in the academy, how if people take the work we do seriously, right? So part of this is, she worked on a project that, folks are saying made America look bad, right? So, I mean, it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. So, they don't need her to make America look bad. America's doing just fine all by its damn self looking bad, right? But for someone like me who works in Europe, who looks at issues of race and gender in Europe, for those of us who do this kind of work, we're often getting pushback from the places that we're doing work. It puts us in a precarious position.
Yeah, and so right? I asked you yesterday, what can we in our communities, what can Black people, what can allies do to support you, to make sure that we got your back if some shit goes down, and just generally helping you to deal with all the fuckery that you got to deal with on a daily basis in the ivory tower? Yeah,
well, I think there are very few of my colleagues that wouldn't see themselves, who would say, if you said, are you a scholar activist? Very few would say, no, I'm not that at all. I mean, we all are by virtue of the work that we do, right? What is helpful is being able to talk about my work in a forum like this with people who may not come across the book, right? Particularly because I study Europe, right? And so there are these beautiful books coming out about African Americans, but part of, I belong in that African diaspora. And so the more people who hear about where we are and the work that we do helps us. The more people who read books like the one that I wrote, the one that Tiffany wrote, that Annette wrote, those kinds of things, who know about sort of what we're doing, can only help us.
Yeah.
Right. Had I been in Paul Jones's footsteps right now, nobody would know about this.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not famous like she is.
Oh yeah, but you know that your team player buddy will be making a whole bunch of fucking noise somewhere. And
yes, and I'm really lucky. But see, that's also something that other people don't have. You know, some of my friends have been getting on my case because MC Hammer threw me a pre-launch book party.
Yeah.
He read. You know why he did? Because he read the book, and
So
he liked the book.
But that's fabulous, though. They're getting in the case because what?
Well, it was sort of like, well, you know, we all don't have MC Hammer's phone number, and I thought, okay. Right. So I think for me, it is the people in our communities reading about the things that we write about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And getting involved when these people pop up and say, you know, this journalist who gave $25 million and has a journalism building named after him has no business talking about anything. And now they're all throwing each other under the bus going, I didn't get that. I didn't really see that. Yeah, okay. And that needs to just get called out over and over and over again. Mm-hmm.
I always wondered why he ain't give no money to an HBCU. Because USC didn't need the money.
You know, it's interesting. This is what I hope happens with Hannah Jones. I hope she gets tenure because she's earned it.
And then tells them.
Exactly. And then sues them. That's what I'm hoping. But, you know, whatever. Yeah. And yes, I'd be happy to put out a book, a list of recommended books. I'm actually right now with another scholar compiling a book of a list of books in Black Europe.
Okay.
So
when you put together, I'll help spread the word, because I think you have a nice coterie of devotees right here.
You know, when I wrote this book, I thought I was going to sell 3 copies, and I thought 2 of the copies were going to be my parents. And the thing that makes me most proud of this book is that I got to write about 3 extraordinary women, and now more people know that they exist. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's more important than me, right? That these women came into my life, that I was overwhelmed by them, and that the universe allowed me to write about them, right? And so I'm really, really humbled and proud that more people know about Sarah Bartman, that more people know about Ulrika, that more people know about Jean Duval.
We just put up your website.
Oh yeah, come play at my website. I mean, look at that cover. Come on now.
Yeah,
look at that.
Yeah, fabulous. I said, oh shit, I know Robin Mitchell.
Whatever. Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm completely famous. My book has sold dozens of copies.
Yeah, right. I have to say publicly that Dr. Robin Mitchell saved my life.
Thank you.
Her cousin, I was renting space from her cousin in my hobo days, and Robin came to DC for the Library of Congress.
I interned at the Library of Congress. Yeah.
In the Library of Congress.
Sorry.
That's not me.
In 1999, severe pain all day. Get home, and Robin says, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I'm gonna go lay down.
I'm gonna go lay down.
Maybe it will get better." She's like, "You're a fucking idiot." And we called my then girlfriend, Latine. Mm-hmm. They took me to the hospital. The idiots at the hospital. Mm-hmm. I won't name the hospital.
I just call it, huh?
The idiot said, had me sit from 6 until midnight, claiming that they wanted to see if it was really appendicitis. And then at midnight, they were like, oh shit, it's getting ready to burst.
Oh shit. Yeah. She came. I remember one of the nurses coming out going, we're willing him to surgery right now. And I don't know how I looked at her. I don't know what we were doing, but man, she scurried.
But you had them scoring for the whole time.
I sure did.
Because they had the operation. When I come out, they tell me that they couldn't wake me up, that after the anesthesia, they couldn't wake me up. And Latine and Robin were like the guardian angels, like Gabriel and Michael. And they
I think at one point we told them someone's going to die here. And it's not going to be Barrington. Youth.
Yeah. But, so public acknowledgement and public thanks, because this is like Barrington 3.0 right now, because I've been on the edge a couple of times.
It was our pleasure. You became my brother so quickly, and it just never ever stopped. And so for all these people out here who think that Barrington is this hotshot journalist and whatever, I call him Barrington Bear. So feel free to pick that up.
Well, hell, all the people that are genuflecting at your altar, I'll tell them, this is my team player. I said, Dr. Mitchell is team player. So yeah. But we've come a long way, cultivated a wonderful, beautiful friendship. I just laugh to myself because I remember us talking about what you wanted, your aspirations when you were at the Library of Congress. I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do that. And I kept on thinking, well, shit, anything you want to do, you can do. Because you're fucking brilliant.
But you were one of the few people who told me that over and over and over again. Yes. It always seemed like a foregone conclusion to you. And I can't even tell you how much that helped. So this is yours too.
Yeah. Oh, good. Shit.
I'm happy to send the $3 or $4 that I get in royalties your way.
Just send me $1.
Okay.
So, listeners, viewers, this has been a special edition. My friend, my love her like cooked food. I'm just so fucking pleased to see the results of her work, the global acclaim for her book, for her work,
we are very
for her scholarship. Because what I love is that it's not Robin Williams. It's not Robin Mitchell, the twerker. It's Robin Williams, the educator, the academic, the author. And it's some serious shit that people are lifting you up about. And I love that. And my prayers for you, that the ancestors and the deities continue to lift you up. And Nana Tigare is telling me that this is just the beginning. So he said, you better buckle the hell up because you're getting ready to go into the stars, baby girl. You thought you were in the stars, you ain't there yet.
Subject matter expert, appearing in several documentaries.
Yeah.
As we speak, I'm putting your name out there.
I'm ready to go.
Agree to be in mine.
Bobby Shaw.
Thank you.
Welcome, Bobby. I will show you how to genuflect. We love you. And one of these days when you're no, wait. You have to tell us what great honor you just got. You're coming to the right coast. Right?
Yes.
I am. I was just chosen as one of the Harvard Radcliffe Fellows, so I'll be in Cambridge for a year working on my next book.
So you will be making some trips to DC in between.
Are you kidding me? Yes.
So we can feed you and all that good shit because food is like the central theme
I'm going to be all up in that area. So,
Go back to
yes.
Michigan, remember?
Yeah, man.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
What a great dinner.
yeah.
So,
So-
yes, I will be in Cambridge.
Yeah, so Cambridge.
Mhm.
So, hey, I ain't going to take any more of your time. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Gracias. How many different languages can we tell her thank you? Dankeschön.
Gracias.
And what else?
Okay, merci.
That's merci, and all that good stuff.
Merci.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for listening. I really appreciate it.
Thank
And
you,
we'd
thank you
love
for writing that book.
We'd love to have you
Thank
back when, if you just call and say, I just want to come on and talk some shit. And we'd be like,
Trust me, I got another thing coming. It's going to be fairly amazing. I'll come back
Okay.
and talk about it.
Corrine, my friend Corrine from FSU days. I love her, even though she's a University of Florida student, a graduate. Interesting conversations. We'll take a read. Thanks for the invite. Yeah, man.
Thank you.
Bobby Shaw says, congratulations. Bobby and I
Thank
went
you.
to high school 100 years ago.
Thanks,
Sean,
Sean.
my new friend, my brother. Congrats. That's phenomenal. Yeah, man.
Thank you.
See, soak it up. We're going to give you all this shit while you're alive. We ain't going to be
I
talking
know.
about
I love it. I love it. I love it. I'll take it all. I will take it all.
She was such a nice person when she was. Nah, we tell
Mm-mm.
you all that stuff now. Yes,
I know.
Alton, Barrington beer.
It's classic.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's real interesting of all the people that have listened that you be the one to come be asking me if it's Barrington beer. But that's all right. It's cool. It's
I know
cool.
I'm going to use it.
Ron, glad to meet
I'm
them.
very proud of it.
Hey,
Oh,
Ron,
thank you.
Robin saved my
She
life
saved his life.
because the idiot was gonna go sleep, and hopefully the pain would go away when I woke up.
Yeah.
Barrington told me that story when you were coming to town, and I was like, I want to meet these women, both of them.
We walked behind the counter
And they were
because
getting
they
ready.
weren't coming out, and they were flirting back. I'm just so mad about it.
I greeted Latine with a total thank you. She
Good.
invited me over for dinner, and I walked in, and I was like, I need to hug you and thank you. And I feel the same way about you. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
It is my pleasure.
All right, my dear.
All
All
right.
right.
Love you.
We
Love you
Take
too.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. We love you too.